Welcome to the point of view for our viewers on YouTube. This is a special show tonight looking at the 6th coup in the sub-region in 3 years. Niger on the 27th of July held a coup. I have a panel that's going to look at why it happened and whether ECOWAS's threat will be carried out. Stay with us. If you like, kindly share with your followers so they can also enjoy. So welcome back. The point of view tonight is asking how Niger got where it got to, and more broadly, what can be done so that this apparent reversal in democracy within the sub-region stops. This is the 6th coup in West Africa in the past 3 years. Mali has had a coup, Guinea has had a coup, Burkina Faso has had a coup, Chad has had a coup. If you do the Sahel all the way to Sudan, I'm going to show you a map that will do that. But I have a very crack team in studio. I have the Member of Parliament for Boku, who's also a member of the ECOWAS Parliament, the Honorable Mahama Ayariga. He's joined us in studio. Honorable, great to have you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hope you are well.
You dragged me here.
I dragged you here. Forgive me. I also have Colonel Festus Aboagye, retired, who is, well, obviously a globally recognized security expert within Africa. Is that a good enough description? I can add more later.
No, it's all right.
Thanks for being on the program, Ken. It's good to have you in the flesh.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I also have Dr. Olayinka Ajala, who is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at Leeds Beckett University, who's been writing a lot about both the sub-region and Niger in particular. A lot of his research work is in terrorism, counter-terrorism, and some of those issues. Dr. Olayinka, thanks for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. I want to start off by showing all of you what our team put together before we came on air. First, we wanted to just show this latest coup in Niger being the 6th in the past 3 years. So August 2020, Mali, Assimi Goïta. And then if you want to add Central African Republic because it's on that belt, because indeed the map is telling you that this is like the Sahel zone, right? Central African Republic is not really West Africa, but theirs was December. Then you Chad, Idris Deby was allegedly killed in war, right? And then his son was announced as leader. So you can technically call it a coup. So April 2021, there you have it. Then there was another issue in Mali because there was some supposed handover, and then Goïta comes back in May 2021. So that's number 4. Then in Guinea, Mamadi Doumbouya, September of the same year, he does a coup, and the long-standing leader, Condé, is removed. Then in Sudan, October the same year, there is a coup d'etat, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. As we speak, there is a standoff between two sides in Sudan. There's almost a civil war there. But this was again in October. So 2021 had 4 incidents. Then you had Burkina Faso, which is just north of Ghana, January and then September. So twice in Burkina Faso, Lieutenant Colonel Damioula did a coup. And then, of course, Niger. So first point is about what the map is telling us. And I just wanted to start with Olayinka. What does this map tell us? Is there any clue here as to whether there's a trend? The fact that these countries appear to be on the same line. Is it the Sahara Desert, or what is it? What's causing this that we see?
Yeah, thank you. When you look at all those countries on your map, one thing stands out for all of them, and that is the issue of economic deprivation. If you look at the economic index or even the food security index, for instance, most of those countries, I actually have a map I use in teaching where when we look at food insecurity, all those countries that you have shown are all red. So there is acute poverty in those countries in the region, economic deprivation, lack of security in many of those places. So there are some common denominators which stand out in all of this country that an observer would argue could actually be a baseline factor in all of these issues.
What about their colonial masters? I see Mali is France, Chad is France, Guinea is France, Burkina Faso is France, Niger is France. The only Non-France, there is Sudan. I'm not even sure about Central African Republic. I think it's France as well. Is that another factor, apart from hunger and dryness?
Well, none of them have cited this, but well, in the conversation and accusation against France, we've seen a lot of issue relating to France and how their relationship with these countries. So if you look at Niger, for instance, there is a great animosity against France. The whole idea that France is more interested in its own economic prosperity and not in the economic prosperity or human security of these countries. So this is another issue. And then I've done an analysis looking at Anglophone and Francophone Africa. And when you look at these countries and you compare them side by side, you would see that the level of Anglophone Africa in terms of development is slightly better than those in Francophone Africa. So this could also be an issue, but none of the coups have cited France directly as an issue. The issue comes up, they mention France and the relationship with France, but yes, this is a worrying for France again.
Final thought on this before I come inside. Some of the analysis I've heard suggests that the Niger coup was a surprise because they appeared to be more stable. There was a democracy in place. They are part of a lot of the security things happening in the sub-region. They are well allied to the West. So whilst you can say Guinea and Mali and co were not too surprising, some people feel like Niger was a bit of like, how did this happen? For somebody who researches in Niger, would you agree when people say that this coup was a bit surprising?
Well, it's a bit surprising, but not totally surprising, because I remember in 2021, I wrote an article where I stated that despite Niger being in democracy for 10 years, there are still issues regarding the establishment of democracy in the land. If you recall, 2 days, about 48 hours before the inauguration of Bazoum, there was an attempted coup d'etat in the country. And interestingly, the same General Tiani who instigated the current coup was the one who fought off the last coup. So while you would argue that, yes, it's been a bit stable during the time of President Issoufou, it's never really gone away, to be honest. And there has still been a bit of insecurity, for instance, has always been an issue. Niger has been at the bottom of the poverty index for a very long time. So all these underlying issues that make coups attractive have never gone away.
Thank you. Colonel, what's your comment on the map, August 2020 to July 2023, 8 or so incidents? Is there anything you want to say on this?
Well, for me, I think it's a bit tricky to find common denominators that cut across. And in many respects, there will be country-specific factors. But otherwise, I've appeared before the ECOWAS Parliament subcommittee in Monrovia. I had pointed out that one commonality about these countries, especially those in West Africa, is what I call state fragility. And I think the doctor who spoke mentioned some of the factors of state fragility: the unemployment, the poverty, the youth bulge, the insecurity, especially since about 2011 when Libya imploded and then created corridors for some of these jihadists to come into the Sahel and compound existing fault lines, which were already, like intercommunal kinds of disputes. That's one. All the countries have a history of conflict to different degrees. Other conflicts in the form of coups or civil wars. So if you take Sudan particularly, since independence 1956, the military has ruled 85% of the time. or is it 65% of the time? That's either they are in power, or they are in power with what they call sovereign councils. It's the same scenario that you find in Niger, with the exception of the first president, who, like Kwame Nkrumah, ruled for 14 years. This is the fifth coup in Niger. And it's either the military or it's a brief transition, military cum civilian. The coups are by presidential guards. They've done about 2 of them. You know, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of this. You go to Burkina Faso, it's about the same thing, especially after the long tenure of Kampuari. This so-called entrenchment in power, third term constitutional re-engineering, for instance, so that you stay in power, demonstrates that kind of scenario in Burkina Faso. Then you go quickly to Guinea, and Guinea has, you know, long periods of rule. The first president, the Colonel Conte, for instance. Then after him, you get all of these upheavals. The professor who comes, and you expect that you try and stabilize, consolidate democracy, probably gets away with the idea that he's the only one who can govern. And that outcome is what we saw Doumbouya address. You go to Mali, it's the same thing. It's either coups, or it's poverty, or it's Sahelian insecurity, and so on and so forth. You know, so that narrative of insecurity is something that should, you know, our leaders in the sub-region must address their minds to. Then part of state fragility is democratic deficits, governance deficits. Of course, all of us can claim that we are democratic, but how good, how solid, what is the quality of the democracy that we practice in? You see, so the transfer of power from one administration to the other should be through elections. And we know that elections are manipulated. And somebody has said elections, largely in Africa, hardly reflect the will of the people. Either it's through manipulation or the use of money to monetize, and so on and so forth. So all of these factors band together. Then you add to it the layer of neocolonialism. And it's very clear that, with the exception of Sudan, the rest are all francophone. So in West Africa, out of 8 francophone countries, 4 are already showing signs of instability. And the idea is that if you add Côte d'Ivoire, which recently came out of this kind of scenario, it's about the nature of francophone countries' relationship with France, you know, which controls many of the things that go in there, in those countries, all the way from Paris. So France might appear that, yes, it's helping to fight terrorism and so on, together with America. But they're only there to protect their interests. And that interest is either energy in the form of oil, or it's energy in the form of uranium. In fact, it's natural resources that is keeping them here. Even if it's drones, like many people have been saying that the US, you know, is interested in stabilizing Niger. It's stabilizing Niger so that America and the West can continue to have access
to their natural resources.
Yes. I just heard on BBC that there's a gas pipeline that is being constructed all the way from Nigeria to Europe, especially after Russia cut off, you know, fuel supply or gas supply to Europe. You see what I mean? So their interest is to have stability so that they can exploit the resources that Africa has for their betterment. They are not here, if you like, to help us create strong institutions.
All right.
You see what I mean?
So that's a very good overview.
That is the big picture of why these countries, together with others like us, who are just, you not very solid, stability.
Very Very interesting. Let me take Honorable Ayariga. You are here on two hats. MP for Boku, which is one of the entry points for displaced people within the sub-region, particularly from Burkina Faso. ECOWAS Parliament, who obviously are concerned about the situation. And because ECOWAS itself has said that they don't endorse this coup. My question to you first was this coup a surprise? And second point was, how come ECOWAS' position seems a bit more hardline? Because in Mali or Guinea, even Burkina Faso, we didn't see the level of strong language and direct, almost challenge to the coupists, as we are seeing with the 7-day ultimatum. At least for Burkina, I didn't hear this. I think Mali, there was an initial thing like this, but it sort of backfired. Guinea and Burkina didn't see the level of swift comment from ECOWAS that we are seeing. So first and foremost, from an ECOWAS Parliament perspective, what's the view on what has happened in Niger and why the apparent harder line stance from the sub-regional leaders?
Well, thank you very much. The ECOWAS Parliament hasn't met yet since the coup, so I can't be speaking for the Parliament.
Okay.
Even though I'm the rapporteur for the Political Affairs Committee, and so even if we were to meet, it will be our mandate to look into this and report to plenary. But the reason why the response to Guinea and Mali and Burkina Faso, the responses are different in relation to what we see in Niger, is that in Guinea, the former president resisted ECOWAS's effort to thwart his third-term mandate bid. And it was his desire to extend his rule that, snowballed into what ultimately happened with his removal. And so he didn't really enjoy sympathy from the rest of the sub-region. In fact, the last election that he organized, he refused to allow ECOWAS to send an observer mission.
Wow.
So when the coup occurred, ECOWAS also adopted that attitude. In the case of Mali, ECOWAS actually sent a mission when they were going through the crisis. I was part of the mission. I was physically in Bamako the morning of the military coup.
Jesus.
And the coup was really caused by the previous president because he had organized a flawed legislative election in which his son and his allies had managed to change the results and push their allies into the legislature, were sent to go and convince them to withdraw all those MPs that they had illegally forced into the legislature and illegally imposed a speaker on the parliament. We had a meeting with the speaker the night before, and he assured us that Bamako was very peaceful and there was nothing going to happen, and so we should report at his office the following morning for further discussions. In the morning, we woke up in our suits and ties, ready to go to the legislature when we were told that there was a military coup. We should stay in our hotels. Wow. So again, ECOWAS really thought they caused it, and so the response was muted. In Burkina Faso, there was an ongoing situation, and it seemed the military were coming in to deal with the problem. And so there was some level of sympathy, for the military. So the response was not, that strong. But in the case of Niger, we were all surprised, to be frank with you. We did not anticipate a military coup. We don't believe that the conditions for a military coup had really been created. If you ask me, I will think that this is some internal battle within the palace. The president and his chief security. And after the fact, he's trying to whip up anti-European, anti-Western.
So it's almost like he's rationalizing the coup as he goes along.
The coup as he goes along. And if you really follow the facts, after the coup, the first demonstration was in favor of the deposed president.
Okay.
And he scattered that demonstration using the soldiers, and now started mobilizing demonstrations, counter-demonstrations to show that he also has some support. It's not as if the deposed president doesn't have support.
All right.
It's not the case.
All right.
It's just that they realize the need to mobilize popular support. as for a stadium, what is the capacity of a stadium?
Everybody can mobilize.
Anybody can mobilize the population to fill a stadium and then showcase the rest of the world that they have support. So his coup is being responded to that way by ECOWAS because they really didn't think that there was a basis for the coup. Even if you look at economic development, since Yusufu took over, the GDP of Niger has been consistently growing. Okay, from about 8 billion to 12 billion, and agriculture had started picking up, and they were beginning to export a lot. Even Ghana is a beneficiary of a lot of agricultural
Our onions are stuck there.
Yes, from Niger. And in the last 2 years, you could see that the incidence of, armed attacks and fatalities accompanying them have been reducing. In fact, last year, armed attacks had reduced by about 35%.
Okay.
And so clearly, even the military issues, the issues of conflict were reducing. And that country faces major challenges. All around it, apart from Benin, all the countries around it pose security threats to the country. From Algeria in the north, to Mali, to even northern Nigeria where Boko Haram is operating, to Chad, to Burkina Faso, all about 6 countries surrounding that country. Only one, Benin, can claim to be stable and not presenting security challenges to
So to add the coup makes the whole thing
exactly. So clearly, people sympathize with the democratic government there and the efforts it was making to deal with the security challenges.
All right.
And so for the president's own presidential guard unit, not even the regular army, it was the presidential guard unit that started it. And I cannot sympathize with the presidential guard unit because for the past 13 years, these people have really been in charge of the presidential guard, were part of the governance system of the country, participated in whatever relationship existed with France and other countries, and so cannot overnight, be pretending that it is the elected leaders that are the problem, and they are not part of.
Let me take a short break and come back and look at the ECOWAS response in greater detail. Point of view tonight, we're looking at the Niger situation. My guest, Colonel Festus Aboagye, Dr. Olayinka, and also in studio, Mahama Ayariga. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. The point of view tonight is looking closer at Niger. ECOWAS gave them a 7-day ultimatum to hand back power. They haven't done this. ECOWAS is having a high-level meeting Thursday, the 10th of August. My guest in studio, Mahama Ayariga, MP for Boko, member of the ECOWAS Parliament, Colonel Festus Aboagye, security expert, and Dr. Olayinka Ajala, who is with the Leeds Beckett University. Doc, you wrote an article published yesterday on the conversation on the Niger coup, where you said why an ECOWAS-led military intervention is unlikely. Can you give me the highlights? You basically don't think, even though ECOWAS is saying that they could intervene, you don't think they would?
Well, thank you. What I said in that article is when you look at what is happening currently on ground, it's the logistics for a military intervention would be quite difficult. As I've said earlier, there are 7 countries that border Niger, and out of those 7 countries, 4 of them are members of ECOWAS, albeit 2 of them are under suspension. Burkina Faso and Mali are under suspension. So the issue is when you look at the other remaining countries that are not part of ECOWAS that border Niger, Algeria, Libya, and Chad. Algeria and Chad have already said they do not support any form of military intervention. And then it leaves Nigeria. The current chairman of ECOWAS is Bola Tinubu, to go and make a decision in terms of whether to convince the other ECOWAS members on the need for a military intervention. But when you see what is coming out of Nigeria, especially from northern Nigeria, Nigeria also has 7 states that share borders with Niger. Senators from these states oppose military intervention because they believe there will be great humanitarian consequences. So what I said in that article, which is what's happening currently, is that there is a lot of difficulty in carrying out a military intervention. ECOWAS, they've done a lot. You can give the credit to them in terms of diplomacy. And they've been very clear that, well, military intervention would be a last resort, which understandably, that is the way it should be. But looking at the logistics, and then again, whether we, when you look at the increase in support, yeah, there are lots of people in the country that do not support the regime, but there are still a substantive number of people that support in one way or the other. So all of this makes it very difficult for ECOWAS to carry out a military intervention at this stage. Things might change, we don't know, but at this stage, it looks quite unlikely.
All right, let me come to first, Colonel. You put out 4 scenarios, and I don't know if we have time to go into the details of the scenarios, but essentially in your analysis, you're saying it's not that clear-cut what can or should be done. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
But what the doctor did was to analyze the feasibility of a military intervention. Now, my approach was to look at different scenarios.
Okay.
If the authority decides on a military intervention. And it's an approach that all institutions, national, whatever, must go through. The status quo is what we know. The first scenario that I painted already is playing out. That the CNSP has defied ECOWAS. They've called a bluff, and therefore they are being resilient. They are consolidating their base. They've appointed 8 senior officers as governors of the 8 regions. They've appointed a civilian, I believe. At least they've appointed a prime minister. You say it. And they have started issuing communiques, to the world and to ECOWAS member states. They're flexing their muscles to say that, look, under XYZ conditions, we cannot entertain your delegations. You see, in that kind of environment, they're building resilience. And ECOWAS is being embarrassed, as you suggested. Now, even in the face of the military intervention, it's not going to be a walkover. So it might very well turn out that ECOWAS might have some initial success, and then it fizzles out. And the CNSP, emerges as the whatever. And ECOWAS is forced to now engage through diplomacy, dialogue, mediation, and so on. Or ECOWAS goes in, and for some number of reasons that I've suggested, they achieve a quick...
That's scenario 2.
Scenario 2, a quick victory. They're able to isolate. Remember when the coup happened on the 26th, it took 2 days, thereabout, before the rest of the army threw their support behind the CNSP. It's possible that with the undercurrents, efforts are being made to now split the army from the CNSP, isolate the CNSP. So ECOWAS wins a quick victory. They reinstate Bazoum, and their objective, which has been the core of all that they've been saying, is achieved. And maybe they leave a semblance of, like we did in the Gambia, some military chief or whatever, some diplomats to ensure that, everything is smooth. They come home. Scenario 3 is what is most tricky. That ECOWAS might meet very stiff resistance. And then there are going to be casualties on both sides. ECOWAS troops will die, and Nigerian troops will also die. Civilians will die on both sides. So there is going to be a huge humanitarian crisis. In that situation, the Nigerian authorities, or maybe the ordinary Nigerian citizens, can target ECOWAS citizens who are resident in Niger. It happened to some extent in Liberia. And we would not be in a position to fight our way to go and extricate or evacuate all of our ECOWAS citizens. I've suggested that it's been possible that unless we are able to take out all their air capabilities, they can fly one or two sorties and they will identify which targets to hit, like Ukraine is doing. Ukraine is countering Russian whatever, but not with the aim of winning the war as such, just to show that Russia can also serve. Now, Niger can do something like that. They have a number of options.
So this is the worst case scenario.
This is the worst case scenario.
3 is the worst case scenario.
The other one is that, okay, it goes on and on and on, it draws out, it becomes like ECOMOC. For years, there is no outcome. So it's a mixed balance. And in that mixed balance, ECOWAS will have no other option. In fact, the last two scenarios, one will require a great deal of humanitarian capabilities on all sides. You know, the role of social media I've suggested. In fact, as we speak now, a lot of the information that you and I are getting are coming through social media. Part of it is a bit of a propaganda. And I've suggested that Western and other intelligence agencies are seriously at work to shake international public opinion. All of that is happening, unbeknownst to many of us. You say it. Now let's look at the French factor. I didn't mention that. But if France wants to play its role in Côte d'Ivoire in 2011, hiding behind the UN resolution in 1975 that allowed it to protect civilians, it's going to be difficult this time. Because France will not have any justification. Somebody has suggested that this coup took place without one life being lost. And the person was pointing a finger at Ghana, where we went to elections and we killed 8 people. They have done a coup, nobody has lost a life. So what, and they have not attacked your interest as such. You still have your access to your uranium. So France is not going to find it very easy, or for that matter, America, to come into the equation. And now that Chad is saying, maybe Chad is not telling us the truth, but if indeed we take Chad for its word, if France wants to enter Niger, either it flies in by air and augments the 1,500 that they have on the ground, and I think they've even evacuated some of their troops out of the country. You know, so those scenarios, with the exception of the quick victory,
are all
but
negative.
the quick victory is where we come back to what this professor is saying, that it is not likely that ECOWAS can just, you know, move into the country like the Gambia, whose scenario is very different from Niger. Now, Niger, you look at the map, the population is heavy where Niamey is, close to Benin.
But it's very sparse all over.
It's expansive. It's desert. So even your military equipment, when the sun blows, the weapons that you are using, your communication gear, your laptops, everything will need constant maintenance and repair. It's very difficult. You see what I mean? So that military option, and then let's accept that in Africa, none of our armies, and certainly not in West Africa, has what we call expeditionary capabilities, which is about projecting the force that you have across your borders. So you need strategic lift, you need air power. If it's along the coast, you need naval power. We don't have any of those. Again, as we speak, take Ghanaian soldiers. They are not sitting at home. Quite a sizable number of them are keeping the peace under UN flag. Nigeria is doing the same. Almost everybody is doing the
somewhere.
same.
So
then there are those who go back to their countries, like Ghana, and will now have to sit down and calculate and match things to the national interest. Niger, or not in Niger, Senegal, at this time, may feel very embarrassed, given what happened a few weeks ago, to throw its weight behind the ECOWAS. When they themselves
I've just dealt their,
embarrassed ECOWAS, I think you didn't add them. But if you had added them, clearly, if the balloon had gone up in Senegal, ECOWAS would have sat in Abuja and said, but who caused it? You caused the trouble for yourself. Yeah. So the military option is not an option. The problem is that the doctor mentioned diplomacy, and I think Honorable will expatiate a bit on that. Look, diplomacy is not the way we went about it. You only gave the stick. There were no carrots that you offered. And then whilst you were issuing the ultimatum and imposing sanctions, you are actually acting on the sanctions. So you had not given time for the Nigerians to consider the stakes. You know, maybe make some concessions.
So you are suggesting that the ultimatum was a miscalculation?
And that is where we need now to look for reasons why it happened. And one of the reasons is that, yes, we have an ECOWAS supplementary protocol for democracy and good governance, or good governance and democracy. The operationalization as to the triggers for how we're going to, doesn't exist. So when Ghana is in the chair, our modus operandum is to call the authority to Accra and invite the leaders and threaten them with sanctions. It didn't work. Now, Tinubu has issues of legitimacy. The whole Nigerian elections outcome is in the courts. Now, ECOWAS, I don't know whether wrong or whatever, made him the ECOWAS chair. So he's being too bombastic. You know, he's saber rattling. But remember, this is not a war for Nigeria alone. So Nigeria should not be seen to be dragging ECOWAS, the rest of us. And we're only 11 now. Because 4 of them
are out.
And 3 of them are with the other one, Niger, to say that we have now formed a solidarity. So what the doctor said is really likely. Even if Ghana says we're going to support, of course, our minister said that we'll send troops. But what kinds of troops and how many troops?
Wow.
And who is going to pay for it? Go as you speak. We are broke. Nigeria is also broke. Everybody is broke. You see what I mean?
Wow.
And somebody said, oh, France might give us the money, and that is where we compromise our sovereignty. Because there's no free lunch in diplomacy.
So far, we've not said anything about Russia and Wagner. But I will allow what you and Doc have said to sink in. I'll take a quick break. When I come back, I'll take Honorable's views on this. It's very strong word. Said Bola Tinubu is saber rattling. That's heavy.
That's the only way to call it.
And I think that's very serious. So we'll come back and look at the other geopolitical angles to this and what we should expect on Thursday, because there's a big meeting on Thursday by ECOWAS.
It's tomorrow, actually.
Yes, that's Thursday. So we'll see about that. This is still the point of view. Stay with us.
Global, you order anything you want, and when you receive it, you celebrate it with your whole body. Because when that tasty grilled chicken is here, the weekend starts. The ingredients for your favorite recipe just in time. And when the cake arrives, the party is on. Because receiving anything on Global deserves a dance. Download the app, order anything you want, and track it minute by minute until it arrives. Global, order anything, we deliver in minutes.
Welcome back. We're live. Point of view tonight. We're looking at Niger. There's a map I wanted to show quickly, which is just a history of the most coup-prone. Yes, this one. This is interesting because this map is, since 1952, the most coup attempts, whether successful or failed. And it looks eerily similar to what we showed from 2020, right? So 16 is Sudan. You mentioned Sudan. Sudan has had the most. The only 2 countries outside the Sahel in this list are Burundi and Comoros. Everybody else, the number 7 there is Chad. The number 8 on top is the country we are talking about, Niger. The number 8 at the bottom is Nigeria. Number 8 to the left is Mali. 10 Burkina Faso, 10 Ghana, 10 Sierra Leone, and then 9 is Guinea-Bissau. So there seems to be a very interesting, in fact, they used to call it the coup belt. And I think this is quite interesting. The fact that since 52, the most coup attempts is almost synonymous with what we've seen since 2020, right? Now, Honorable Mahama Ayariga, my question to you is, you are in this in many ways, because you've already come on this show to talk about the influx of displaced people from Burkina Faso into Ghana through your constituency, because I think that's the main entry point. So, does that factor into your views about Niger and whether ECOWAS should intervene or not? Because in scenario 3, there could be displaced people. And if they are displaced, if you look at where Niger is close to Benin, they will come through your constituency. Is that part of your calculation in the way you look at this?
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, but the real issue for me is, what are the issues in these countries? Military takeovers, the appropriate responses. Have they demonstrated a better capacity to deal with the issues? For me, those are the key fundamental questions. And what does this portend for ECOWAS as a sub-regional organization? I think that the issue of democracy is so important that the region must be willing to invest in it. Of course, I was concerned when we adopted this same approach in the Gambia. And on several occasions, I did ask my colleagues whether, if a similar situation such as the Gambian one arose in Nigeria or Senegal, we will be able to respond the way that we responded in the Gambia. We were faced with a similar situation in Mali. We didn't respond the same way, even though we had troops in Mali. We still have troops in Mali, but we didn't respond that way in Mali. Burkina Faso, we didn't respond the same way. Now it is Niger, and we are seeking to respond the same way. Is it too late? Should that be the standard for ECOWAS when democracy is threatened in any of the countries? I think where we are, ECOWAS has boxed itself into a corner. If we don't respond the way that we have threatened to respond, we are damned. And if we respond that way and we don't respond effectively, we are damned. So that's how I see it. It is too late to be talking about diplomacy, because given the posture of the military junta in Niger, I doubt if diplomacy will achieve the results that ECOWAS is asking for, which is that they leave office and hand over to the former president. It will be difficult for the military junta. Whether or not a military solution is possible, I'm not an expert.
Okay.
So I can't really prefer an opinion on that. But I do not think that the Nigerian security apparatus has the capacity to withstand the combined forces of West Africa.
So your point is, if ECOWAS decides to intervene...
If they decide to intervene and they even make, in my opinion, a minimum effort, I believe they will succeed. The reason is that I don't think the Nigerian security apparatus is that united behind the presidential guard unit that is really the ones behind this coup. As the records show, it took time before even the regular army came to support them. And they said the reason why they came to support them is because they just want to avoid a conflict and bloodshed, not because they really believe in what they are doing.
But when ECOWAS attacks, you unite them. Because as soon as
you think ECOWAS will go there without having made contact with the regular army.
So ECOWAS will not be that naive.
But as ECOWAS has to be more strategic.
But do we have a standing force?
And the interesting thing about Niger is that Niger's population is evenly spread across West Africa. Even in Ghana, a significant number of Nigerians are here, to the extent that any presidential candidate in Niger has to come and campaign in Ghana, because they have so many citizens in Ghana.
Do they come?
Yes, they come. On several occasions, I've met Nigerian, presidential aspirants here in Ghana campaigning.
There are that many.
And they do vote here. The same way I mean, all the small filling stations across the country in the rural parts of Ghana are owned by Nigerians. Most of the people who are involved in the forest bureau business.
So the Gao people are Nigerians?
They are all from Niger.
They're Bochis.
Yes. The same way in Burkina, in Benin, in Togo, in northern Nigeria. And it's not as if the military junta really do have the support of the entire population of Niger. They are just making a show of it. We don't want military intervention because definitely even if one life is lost through military action, we won't be happy. But at the same time, I do not think that the democracy of Niger is so flawed that they should take them out. Because 10 years ago, they had gone through serious, military issues. Chad had to come in and then help them to ward off, attackers from the northern part of Niger. If you recall, Idris Deby and co. So they then transitioned into a democratic government, and for the first time, the president did 2 terms and didn't try to stay on. He peacefully, handed over to this current, president that has been removed through a freely held democratic elections. And they were building their institutions, both the democratic institutions, their governance institutions, and etc. I have traveled in all the countries that are facing these serious military problems. And I think that the major issue they are facing is one of governance. And I have consistently said that ECOWAS needs to be interested in these countries in between elections.
They shouldn't wait for coups and
They shouldn't wait for coups and crises to come in. Because these countries have large ungoverned spaces. And they are still building their states. And there's resistance to the building of the states arising from the situation in Mali, in Algeria, in Sudan, in Libya, in Algeria, in Sudan, and etc. So ECOWAS needed to really show support to them beyond just helping them to transition and having elections, to have sent in troops. And I thought that this was a time we should be having the ECOWAS High Command, a standing army, well-resourced, to be able to move in and help these countries deal with the ungoverned spaces and replicate some of the successful governance institutions in the southern belt.
So Honorable, if I hear you right,
yes,
you're saying that if ECOWAS decides to intervene militarily, you think they will be successful?
I think that they have a chance of being successful. I think that ECOWAS has the capacity to pay the price it takes to go in and take out the military junta now and make a point about how, as a sub-region, we value democracy and force Burkina Faso and Mali to transition fast, because they've been giving us excuses.
So
we will do this over this period, and then when it's time, then they move on.
The threat that Mali, I think Guinea and Burkina sort of gave, that they will support the junta in Niger.
They haven't finished solving the problems in their countries. I mean, they haven't resolved the security issues in Burkina Faso. I don't think they have the capacity to lend any significant support to Niger. I don't believe that Mali has the capacity where it is sitting to provide significant military support to Niger. On the other hand, Senegal, Ivory Coast, that's La Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, okay?
Yeah.
Combining their forces and moving in from northern Nigeria will be able to take out, because all these things that they are talking about, the concentration of the operation is in Niamey. It is in Niamey. And already there are French forces and American forces on the ground. The French forces have indicated, the French government has indicated that it will do whatever ECOWAS decides to do. And it will lend its
So everybody's looking at ECOWAS.
So everyone's looking at ECOWAS. And I think the ECOWAS has boxed itself into a corner. If they don't take steps to take out the military government, then ECOWAS is finished.
Let's talk to Dr. Ajala Olayinka. Doc, so I've kept you on because I want you to introduce now the Russia dimension to all of this, because we do know that there are some troops from Wagner in the sub-region, and with all that's being said, you are saying you don't think ECOWAS is going to go. The MP says if they go, they'll succeed. The soldier says there are many scenarios we should consider. It's not conventional like Gambia. What are your thoughts? Is there a likelihood that the Junta could solicit support from the Russians, which then could lead to a more complicated situation? Doc?
Well, I think they can. They've already said that anyway. They've threatened to lend support from, seek support from Wagner if there is any military intervention. But again, as said by Colonel and Honorable, Niger is a very big country. So it's not something that could be done quickly in the short term. So in the medium term, yes, because they're already isolated, there is a lot of issues around Lake Chad, around the border areas with Burkina Faso and Mali and all those areas for them. So they will not be able to fight this alone. You know, Niger is a strong member of the Multinational Joint Task Force, the G5 Sahel. These are organizations fighting insurgency and countering trafficking in the region. Wagner coming in will not be significant in the short term. It takes a lot to deploy troops, especially in a country as big and difficult as Niger. So it's going to take a lot. But just briefly going back to what Honorable said earlier, it's going to take almost a miracle for politicians in northern Nigeria to allow this to any kind of military intervention to happen through the north. Because if you understand this terrain very well, this is where I work, this is where I carry out a lot of research, the border areas. Nigeria has 7 states that share border. People don't even know the border areas because they go in and out of these countries. They have family members there, they have houses there. So there's a lot at stake, especially for northerners in northern Nigeria, if there is any intervention. So there will be a lot of pressure on Tinubu. And again, going back to what was said earlier, it is just weeks in office with a lot of court cases hanging around his neck. He would want to tread carefully. So,
do you agree when the colonel says that Tinubu is being a bit like swashbuckling? He's a bit too eager. Some people have even criticized him of course, he's a new president, so he's boxed himself into a corner. And because I'm told that there are northern leaders who could actually have been more effective as mediators, so that if he was minded for a diplomatic solution, I'm told that you could send Buhari or you could send the Sultan of Sokoto or somebody who they would listen to more. What are your thoughts around Bola Ahmed Tinubu and his approach to this?
To be fair to him, he had already sent the Sultan of Sokoto. So he sent the Sultan of Sokoto and former military president of Nigeria, Abdulsalami Abubakar. These people they are both Hausas and they understand the terrain, they speak the same language. So he had sent them. But again, when you look at his campaign and then being the president of ECOWAS, he wanted to show that, well, he's going to be a strong chairman of ECOWAS, not president, chairman of ECOWAS. And yes, he boxed himself into a corner because he didn't envisage that. Even before the coup happened, he talked a lot about coup and how it's not going to be acceptable and ECOWAS is going to play more significant role in not making it happen. I think he had packed more than he could carry, and it's becoming very difficult for him at the moment. Yes, but in terms of diplomacy, he had tried using people who are familiar with Niger, he didn't yield it.
Yeah, final point before I come back in. I think I heard Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, joined the Russia-Africa summit, sort of denounced the coup. I don't know if I heard it right, but that was quite baffling because some people thought that because of Niger's closeness with the West, Russia would have come to say, yeah, good riddance. But Lavrov sort of said, no, we don't think this is the right thing to do. Does that leave a door for Wagner? Because we don't even know if Wagner is on talking terms with Putin properly. So I want your views around what Russia's position is and whether that should be factored into the analysis going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. The issue with Russia is Russia has to look at the cost-benefit analysis of whatever they want to do with Niger. Russia is in a very weakened position now, and the bulk of their allies are in Africa. They understand that African Union, ECOWAS, most governments in Africa are strongly opposed to this coup d'etat. So they won't want to upset their allies. So Russia has to play that role to say, well, we are with our allies in condemning this coup. Or they didn't outrightly condemn it. What they just said was that they want a return to constitutional order. The same way America has not called this a coup yet, America is also playing this game of trying to see how it will end up at the end of the day. So Russia is being very careful to not support outrightly so that they would not lose their allies in Africa. This might then again, because Russia would sometimes say, well, we are not Wagner. Wagner is just a private company. They don't act for Russia. So this might, don't let me say would, it might give that opening for Wagner to come in as an independent actor, but we know they are not independent.
Well, we've been given 7 more minutes, so I'm going to come back to Festus, Colonel. What are your thoughts around what ECOWAS should be doing? Because it seems as if, from everything that's been said, everybody's waiting for ECOWAS. So the Thursday meeting, the tomorrow meeting, what should they be talking about tomorrow as they think about this situation?
Well, there's a term that we've all come to hear a lot more of in American lingo. Say dial back.
Dial back.
Yes, dial back. Because ECOWAS ran ahead of itself. And for me, as we say in some of our local languages, if you forget and you go back to collect it, it's not a taboo. So I would expect that ECOWAS is going to recalibrate. They may probably also receive briefings from their respective military chiefs. Not about the will to go in, but the requirements and the cost or the risk involved. Look, you can go in. Let me say the Wagner factor. If you look at it carefully, Wagner might not necessarily be interested in, or for that matter, Russia, to just take Niger. But if you look at how Russia is building its footprint in Africa, there is a strategic pattern of increasing its presence in Africa, when a few years ago they had no presence at all. Now, Wagner, like any private military company or security company, and here I want to say that when I hear this cry about mercenaries not respecting human rights, we're here in West Africa during the ECOMOG crisis in Sierra Leone. There were 3 Western private military companies who deployed to Sierra Leone. One was British, Sandline International. The other one was South African, Executive Outcomes. The other one was British-sponsored Gurkhas. They went there to protect either the presidency or to protect mining interest. And that's what Wagner is doing. If they get a footprint in Niger, they're going to be paid. Besides cash, they'll be paid with mineral concessions. So I wouldn't rule that out. Now, ECOWAS need to factor all of these things in. Then we need to be careful. You see, if you listen carefully, I think the doctor mentioned it, America has not emphasized the reinstatement of Bazoum. America has emphasized restoration or return to democracy, whatever it is. Why are they saying that? Why are they saying that? France has not mentioned Bazoum. France has said my interest. You see what there might be reasons. There is something called smart power. And this professor called Collier says that smart power gives room for Western powers not to waste their time protecting African states, but to use African militaries to check African civilian governments who are uncontrollable. So we might not know who is behind this coup, for instance, But it's possible that America says, I don't need troops here. But if I can get the Niger armed forces, to check the nonsense that West African whatever is doing, I stay in Washington.
So many possibilities.
So many possibilities. And West Africa needs to. Finally, let me say that playing into the gallery of France should not be part of the ECOWAS calculation. And we need to avert our minds to Côte d'Ivoire in 2010, 2011. You see what I mean? Yeah. When we dealt with Gbagbo and then put Ouattara back. Now Ouattara has served his term. He has re-engineered the constitution to continue to serve. ECOWAS has not raised a finger. And yet when Niger does something, ECOWAS says, I'm going to invade your country. Now Ouattara has Ouattara has the audacity to say that I'll only leave politics if Gbagbo and Konambedie also commit to leave politics. I mean, is that how politics is about? That in Ghana, President Nana Akufo-Addo will say that, look, if Mahama doesn't get out of politics, I also not get out.
It's almost unheard of.
Yes, it's unheard of. You see what I mean? So that Ivorian narrative, because Gbagbo dared to touch the interests of France, we must learn that kind of lesson.
So we should be.
If we can't go it alone,
vassal of France.
Yes, if we can't go it alone, let us dial back and let us engage. After all, what are we looking for? We're looking for a transition. We want a transition that will be as short as possible. You see what I mean? Because Mali has gotten away with 5 years, or is it Guinea? Yeah. They started with 18 months, then they went to 2 years, then they added 3 years. It's 5 years. If we are lucky, 2024 before they get off the scene. Once the military gets onto that stage, it is calamitous to use force to get them out. Yahya Jammeh was a civilian. He was not a military man.
And it's a small country.
Very small country.
He had transitioned into a civilian.
Yes.
Yeah, and the country is within Senegal.
There are many
So
calculations.
we shouldn't, I think a very key point you've made is that we should not play to the hands of any power. ECOWAS should try and assert its sovereignty.
Then when it's all said and done, this question of democracy, what exactly does it mean?
Yeah.
Because the only way to prevent coups is to consolidate democracy, good governance, the rule of law, respect for human rights, check corruption. You see what I mean? All of which have security implications, national security implications, and implications for human security. If we don't do that and we think that democracy is this cycle of 4 years or 5 years, go for elections, come back, business as usual, they are untouchable. You see what I mean? That is not what democracy is about. So I'm saying that we can go to Niger, but Niger is not going to be the last time that we might hear of.
When we look at the map in front of us, in some way, so apart from Ghana, because even Senegal has had issues now, Côte d'Ivoire has issues, Liberia has an election. It's very bleak, isn't it?
Well,
because
all said and done, Senegal is the only country
that has never
gone through this.
Yes.
They came close. And only the intelligence agencies knew how close Senegal came to a coup. But at least it didn't happen. So at least
we pray it continues like that. But from the way the opposition leader is being hounded,
it's not all over.
Yeah, so my point is that with all the challenges we have in Ghana, we seem to still be the only bright light in that map there. We are the only country where realistically elections outcome cannot be. You get what I'm saying? It's like we've changed power many times. So in fact, in a lot of the articles I've read, they said the sub-region has not lost hope because there are countries like Ghana here who show that democracy can work, which I think is very sobering, because for us here, we feel like, well, things are not working, change constitution, all of that. But when you analyze the sub-region, we have a semblance of a system that others have been had in almost 40 years. So we should be grateful for that and find a way of making it better. You don't think so?
No, I do think that there's something to learn about Ghana. The same way that I also feel that we seem to be forgetting very fast. We seem to be forgetting very fast. Like I said, the problem is not just elections and how to get people into office through the ballot box. The problem is how to help them govern. And that is where I have consistently said ECOWAS appears to be failing those countries that are now experiencing a wave of military coups. It started in Guinea. Alpha Conde got into office, tried as hard as he could to change the systems and rule as long as possible. And ECOWAS, didn't fare well in dealing with the problem. So the same way, Mali was a problem, and they couldn't put enough pressure on the leader to at least stick to some of the democratic values. If you recall, until Blaise was forced to leave, it was a similar mechanism of staying for as long as he could. And since he left, there's been so much instability. It meant that it was just a one-man rule. He didn't build the democratic institutions. And ECOWAS didn't invest in democratic institutions. Mali, I'm saying that Niger is one that is starting, and they appear to be trying to build democratic institutions, and they've suffered a setback. We need to move to make sure that it doesn't happen. If it does, then ECOWAS will lose the moral authority to stop anything from happening in any country.
Wonderful.
Why Nigeria must be firm is that Nigeria, given its present condition, cannot afford to have just on its northern border a military regime. Nigeria cannot afford that. Where Nigeria is today, to have its northern border tolerate a military regime,
it's not good because of all the challenges with
because of all the challenges Nigeria is facing. And once we lose Nigeria again,
What about
so this is a test.
the rest of West Africa.
Chad?
So this is a test.
Chad is not one of us. Is Chad one of us?
They are neighbors.
No, Chad
they are,
is not
they are
one of
Central
us.
Africa, yeah.
No, Chad is not one of us.
That's number 7 on the
So
map.
that is the issue with Chad. But for us in West Africa, we cannot afford it. So in as much as none of us wants a military intervention, we cannot adopt a posture that encourages the military junta. That threat must be there so that the diplomacy will also work.
All right.
I hope you understand me.
Thank you very much.
That threat, we must press that threat in order to allow, to give some gas to the diplomacy.
Thank you very much. I've been speaking to Mahama Ayariga, MP for Boko Central, and also a member of the ECOWAS Parliament. Colonel Festus Aboagye is a security expert, and Dr. Olayinka Ajala is a senior lecturer in politics and international leadership at Leeds Beckett. Does lots of research in the Niger area. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show. If you love this show, please share the link if you are watching on social media and let others enjoy too. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
The Point of View is brought to you by Belpack. Belpack, just perfect.